Nothing like a good deep breath in the morning through the nose. Hi, dear listeners. This is Dave Munson. That's me. This is the Wake Up Laughing podcast. I am here because I care about the current situation of mental health in America, especially the youth. I don't want to get too serious, but it's really tragic that most youth in America right now are suffering from anxiety and depression. So I am sharing my personal experiences with anxiety and depression, and then finding other people who have championed their experiences and sharing those, and basically saying, hey, we used to do all these things, but we stopped doing them. And I believe there's a connection between the fact that we stopped behaving as mammals and Homo sapien tribal people and the fact that we're all sick. Gee, maybe there's a connection. I've never said this before in front of the camera, but that's the crux of what my book is about. Oh, don't you worry, I have a guest. This is not just the Dave Ramble show. We have Sam Becker here with us today. Do you want to say hi, Sam, so everyone can see how young and healthy and handsome you are?
Hey Dave, great to be on the show. Appreciate you for having me on and for the thought that you're putting into all these deeply important subjects.
Awesome. Thank you. You did better, that you fared way better than Patch Adams or Roger Anderson. You got to say something within the first couple sentences. Now I'm going to talk by myself for a half hour. Just kidding. So yeah, don't be afraid to go to davidcmunson.com. That's where you find out about the book, also called Wake Up Laughing. Please send all your friends, your grandparents, but mostly your young friends that are the future of the world. So we're going to talk with Sam Becker about his experiences with anxiety and depression. And you betcha I'll be chiming in my stories, because I just can't quite, I can never contain my stories. They just force their way out. So, but I'm going to start with a joke, because I realize seriousness is the opposite of humor. In my brain, they're the opposite. So I'm going to start with a joke. Cheesy G-rated joke, because that's our audience. Okay, so a guy walks into a bar, right? That's the start of every G-rated joke. A guy walks into a bar with a giraffe. He sits down at the counter. The guy's there with his giraffe. The giraffe's right there. Guy and a giraffe. Nothing strange about that, right? The guy's sitting there talking to the bartender. All of a sudden, he looks over and the giraffe just falls over backwards, dead as a doornail, dead on the floor of the bar. There we are. Now we're in a bar. There's a dead giraffe on the floor. The guy that brought in the giraffe finishes his beer and starts walking out the door. And the bartender looks at the guy and he says, hey, are you just going to leave that lion there? And the guy looks at him. He says, that's not a lion. It's a giraffe. So
Love that.
that's a safe joke. Like, yeah.
No, that's perfect. I mean that's very much aligned with my pun-based sense of humor, and I got a good chuckle out of it. So thanks for sharing.
Good. Yeah. And I just started the timer, so I have an idea of how long we're doing this for. Oh, life is good. I'm just gonna, one of my chapters, I got 23 chapters in my book. One of them is gratitude. Hey, I'm feeling grateful right now. I've got a house, I've got food, I've got a dang nice new jacket made by one of the most responsible companies on the planet. Nobody is bombing my house right now. Nobody's trying to shoot me. No one that I know of is trying to poison me. That's a lot to be grateful for. I'm not in a refugee camp. I'm not in a homeless camp. And man, we got to touch on the work you do with the homeless. But we aren't going to go there yet. I had a plan. Remember my plan? What was my plan? My plan was, here it is. It's all mapped out. Yeah. So yeah, Sam, I'm gonna let you take over the screen, and I'd like to hear about, where you grew up, how you grew up, a little context for it, because I'm sure anxiety and depression in the middle of the ghetto is different than anxiety and depression in a white middle class neighborhood. Um, so yeah, can you do that? Can you share something about like where you grew up, how your childhood was, and then maybe yeah, what led up to your first experiences with anxiety and depression?
Yeah, definitely. And before I jump in, I just want to appreciate the name of the podcast. It just I think, I mean, when I think of waking up laughing, it rings true to me because there are some nights where I wake up laughing, and it is just one of the most beautiful experiences. Like I'm laughing in my dream, and then I just wake up and I'm actually laughing. And so
You're the first person who's ever said that.
it is a truly beautiful experience, definitely one of those warm, fuzzy moments for me.
We are unique individuals because that has happened to me once in my life where I was being followed by Woody Allen and I had all of these jokes and he was like cracking up and he's following me like a friggin' puppy dog and he's like, Dave, give me another one, and I'm just all duh, 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 and he's just bending over and I woke up laughing and then I thought, wait a minute, we should do this every day. So
Yeah.
ideally, I would be feeding that thought to myself every night, and I would be intentionally cultivating the art of waking up laughing. But you did it. You do it. It's like normal for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, not normal per se. I'd say, it happens a few times a year, but when it does, geez, it is such a glorious feeling. So, yeah, that's wonderful that you've also had that experience. I haven't met many others who have.
So I
And
I
really
love if
beautiful.
we're gonna be in some magic. I'm like I'm gonna take my boots off and my socks off, and I'm gonna jump around in that magic. I don't want to move away from it so fast. How about this? Have you woke up laughing with like a girlfriend with you or something, where so like the person's like, dude, and then maybe she starts to giggle, and then you're both waking up laugh. Is that as good as it gets?
Yeah, that has happened to me before, and it is a really, really wonderful experience. I think to just be next to someone you dearly love and to kind of wake up laughing by no kind of joke that someone else is making, just a sort of a fiction of your own mind, and then to be able to share that with someone else in the middle of night, when you're not really expecting anyone to be laughing next to you. It is a hilarious sort of scene. And so, yeah, definitely have been with people who have experienced that laughter, started laughing themselves, and then it's this, little moment in, the nighttime, a time that is generally not characterized by laughter, certainly after you're asleep, that is then full of laughter. And it's a really nice experience. Wish I could do it more often.
Cool. Well, I think we can do whatever we want. So if we really want to do that more, then we can. But yeah, thank you for that. I've had a lot of people say that they like the title, and somebody was recommending I change the title, but I'm not listening to that person.
Good, good. I think it's a beautiful title.
So, how was it for you in the ghetto? Making your way down to the corner to buy some RC cola. Just kidding.
I certainly, yeah, no, certainly grew up in a middle class household. My parents were just, people who together were just and together and individually, like very, very loving and supportive. Grew up in the hills of Talent, Oregon, on a few acres, close to a bunch of really gorgeous nature that we could be hiking through. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways grew up very privileged. I have a sibling who I love dearly, and yeah, I think when I reflect on my childhood, I really feel a lot of warmth. Again, my parents were loving people. We shared a lot of fun experiences, whether that was camping during summer times, making food together for dinner, going to see various sort of performances. They just were people who sought to share the love that they have for the world with us. And that's not to say it was a perfect childhood. I don't think such a thing exists. But we definitely had our squabbles at times. I mean, my sibling and I, for instance, we really had it out for each other when we were younger, and it wasn't really until I moved away for college that we became dear friends. And they are one of my best friends now, and I feel so deeply grateful for that. So, I think it took us all a lot of work to get to a place where love is the medium through which we communicate. And I'm so grateful that we put in that work. And again, that's work that comes, partially through the privilege that we had. My dad was an entrepreneur, had a small business that my mom now runs, and pretty wonderful to be able to have the space and time unimpeded by work to work on family dynamics. So yeah, I currently live in Brooklyn, New York. That's where I'm coming to you from today. And yeah, right now in my life, I'm energized by loving reciprocal relationships with friends and family, and my partner engaging in police abolition and mutual aid around homelessness with a group of really caring comrades, and moving my body in various ways. So that's a bit about where I grew up, what I'm up to right now, what makes me energized.
Cool. That's great. And your childhood has a lot of parallels to mine. I grew up in the hills of Los Gatos in the South Bay, and I was surrounded by nature, and I spent my time outside making little trails for our mountain bikes, building forts, climbing trees, exploring gullies and creeks. And it was very healthy. I had good friends. My parents liked to throw parties. We would all sit together on the couch and watch Mork and Mindy in the evenings. Nobody was in their room with a screen by themselves. It was a different world. Things were good. But as I'm guessing you may also share, at about 18, when it's time to leave the nest, and actually maybe even earlier than that, there comes a point where somehow we begin to live apart from what our soul needs are. And then the further we drift away from feeding ourselves, our souls, we can become sick. So the next question was going to be to describe your warm fuzzy, but I think waking up laughing is a great warm fuzzy. But in after my last interview with Roger Annenson, the warm fuzzy, one aspect of the warm fuzzy is it's a tool that you can use if you are anxious or depressed. You can think about the warm fuzzy, and it's a tool to shift your mental and physical state by causing your brain to release oxytocin into the bloodstream, which is the feel-good chemical, or one of many feel-good chemicals. So with that in mind, like for me, it's like I pretend like I'm going to take firewood to my grandmother, who's no longer with us. But the memory of loading the truck of firewood and leaving early in the morning with the truck filled is like, that's my warm fuzzy. And all I have to do is think about that and like really close my eyes and be there and feel the firewood, be in the truck heading on the long trip. And it helps me I can just, man, it's just amazing. Like the anxiety and the depression is gone. I'm in that beautiful state of well-being. So with that framework, do you have another warm fuzzy that pops into mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think it relates to experiences that I had pretty routinely growing up. On hot summer days, in like August, just really relished the memories when my family would come together during the evening. Everything when I reflect on it seems really still and calm, and our bodies and the plants were kind of coming back to life after the heat of the day. And my dad would sometimes grill really tasty burgers, full of garlic and herbs, and topped with tomatoes and lettuce from the garden. And then my mom would sometimes make a blackberry pie or cobbler with berries that, some of us picked during the day, from the surrounding area. So, when I think about that, it just kind of seems like time just kind of seems to stop, and it brings me, I think, to the present moment. It makes me feel within my body, and yeah, it's truly beautiful to have those sort of memories that I can latch onto and reflect on in both good times and bad.
Cool, cool. Yeah, and a big part of it is having the conscious awareness that maybe the minute you're going into a place that you don't want to be with anxiety or depression, it's like, ooh, I don't want to be here. It's time for an August barbecue. Let's do the August barbecue. Yeah, feeling better. Feeling anyway. I like to promote that as kind of a basic trick. The thing for me is a lot of times I would have anxiety in bed in the morning, and just getting up and getting out of bed, I feel lucky because that generally solves it. Once I get up and get moving, I'm okay. But sometimes I like to lay in bed and play with that. Like I'm like, can I make the anxiety go away? But
Mm,
anyway, so I think that's a great tool to have, the ability the ability to switch your state by, it's almost like our brain is like a slide projector, and you just pop that the anxiety slide out and pop in the August barbecue slide, and it's like, oh well, we just changed our reality. And then to realize that there's a chemical uh, manifestation, there's a chemical aspect of the changing your thoughts. That thoughts, my friend Roger Ananson calls it reminiscence therapy. So you're tying in with this stored memory, this little cluster of cells or whatever in your brain that represent that experience, and that, yeah, it just affects your emotional body, your psychology. Anyway, it's a good
of
choice.
course.
So let's see. So yeah, I'd like to hear about, with all that, my childhood wasn't perfect either, but it was generally solid. And we lived in the same house most all of my childhood and everything. And so from your perspective, how did it start? How did it start coming out of health? Like when did you first start having to like notice, like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious?
Mm. I think the first inkling of that anxiety was when I transferred schools. So I went to the SISU school in Ashland, a Waldorf school, quite a privilege to be able to go to an institution like that. And then I transferred to another private school, another very privileged institution in Medford called St. Mary's. And it was then that I was kind of greeted with a different metric by which I was expected to be living my life. I think up until that point, I had a pretty competitive mentality. that was applied to sports, and I think, was in some cases not not that healthy. I think it expressed itself in anger sometimes and disappointment, but overall it was just it was something that it was something that I think stayed within the realm of sports, and something that I really appreciated. I was able to connect with a bunch of really, really lifelong friends through that sort of competitive ethic. But when that ethic was applied to success in school, and I was kind of made to feel like in order to, be someone, I had to be excelling in school. I had to be better than my classmates. I had to do better than I did, on the last test. I think it was then that this sort of uh, paradigm of like um, I don't know, viewing my life in the present maybe shattered because I was really forced to look at how my life would unfold in the future. I started to think about college, like as a freshman in high school. I mean, even before then, eighth grade, thinking about college, thinking about, how just living with the anxiety of, every test being this kind of precursor to being a successful human being. That was a pretty difficult time for me, and I think making that transition was really difficult. I up until like sixth or seventh grade, I didn't even have grades in school. So, obviously a very kind of uh, cloistered educational experience. One that I think the public school system could benefit from. Obviously, it's severely underfunded, and it Republicans, conservative Democrats, consistently at war with that sort of funding. But yeah, ideally, we'd have a education system that is asks less of its students, and asks less of its students as people who produce good test grades, and asks more of its students to show up as they are, as human beings, and to explore what that actually means. So,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where the sort of where some of that anxiety really started for
Yeah, and
me.
I like how clear you are on that. Like you see all that real clearly, and I really appreciate how you said that going to St. Mary's, which I'm guessing was kind of college prep, like you were being groomed and prepared for more competition and a higher level of competition. And unfortunately, that competition leads you to the workplace where you're going to go out and cut some more throats and step on some more heads and elbow your way to the top, whatever. But I love how you said that before you went to the St. Mary's, you were living in the present. You were like just a little mammalian member of your tribe with your tactile experiences and your Waldorfian, like, the blessings from the teacher to be in your body and to be a unique individual and not just a number on a Scantron form. And I like how you said in the at St. Mary's, for the first time, it was about the future. Like they're like training you to be thinking about, okay, well, I have to do this now so that I can be ready for what's next, so that I can be ready for what's after that. Because anxiety and depression tend to always be about the future, and fear, because in the moment everything's fine. Like I could be having an anxiety attack right now, but the temperature in my room is good. I've got food in the fridge. I've got people that love me. The moment, and that's one of the great things to remember when you're dealing with anxiety and depression, is to come into the moment and be like, and take a deep breath and be like, okay, well, everything's good here. I guess it's something out there, that I'm worried about. So, yeah. So I'm sorry you had to make that change. I was being groomed for college also, and I was taking all the upper level math and science, and I went to college, but I a little bit begrudgingly. I was like, well, people would say, "Are you going to college?" And I would say, "Well, yeah, doesn't everybody?" I knew that it was a racket. I knew that I was being placed on a treadmill, on a meat packing assembly line. I knew that, but I went anyway, and it took me 2 years before I finally crashed and had to find out who I really was.
Mm.
So yeah, so you're saying, I think at sixth grade, seventh grade was when you made the switch.
Yeah, so transferred to St. Mary's for eighth grade.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did you do your high school there?
I did. Yeah, so yeah, I went from eighth to high school, through high school at St. Mary's, and during that time, I really changed from this kid who was fun loving, a goofball, to someone who was very, very dedicated to school and extracurriculars and the future. And I think it stripped a lot of the love that I had for life away from me. And it certainly bore fruit, and I was able to get into a very prestigious college. But it was a really, I think, difficult experience in a lot of ways, and only complicated by the death of my dad when I was going into my senior year there, which is something I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, it was it I
Yeah,
think I think like a lot of college prep schools, as you mentioned, these are places that really ignore the nourishment of students in the moment, in order to kind of achieve some very particular, kind of minute version of success in the future.
that's right. You give away the moment, you give away this day, this week, this year for some golden carrot that you might not actually get till you're 65. Uh,
Yeah, or
so
never get, because it's a figment of our imagination. What
yeah,
success actually is. Even if you make money, you're not necessarily guaranteed any sort of happiness.
yeah, yeah. Wow. So that's interesting. I dropped during this interview with Rebecca Schlossberg of the Rogue Valley Farm to School Project. I was getting really wacky in that interview, and I made all these jokes. And at one point, she's like, a lot of kids don't do well in class, and I'm like, really? And she's like, oh yeah, the pressure. And I was like, and I dropped into this comedy routine, and I'm all, you mean like, God, I'm 8 years old and I'm behind on my paperwork and my boss is chewing my butt off and I'll never be able to afford to buy a house. I'm 8 years old, and how am I ever going to be able to buy a house? I'm behind on my paperwork. Anyway, I just like busted into that little rant, and I really want to be a stand-up comedian. I'm doing this because it's I'm being told to do this, but really I want to be a comedian.
Yeah,
So,
no, I mean, relatable, honestly, Dave. Like, I think I heard a joke in high school where it was like, it was just, the premise was basically like, I need to get good grades so I can get into a good retirement home. Super, super sinister, but
that's great.
also,
I love that.
also very real.
Well, yeah, there's people in my family that have $1 million retirement plan. And I'm jumping ahead now, and I'm wondering, like, so if I'm at my house in greasy old pajamas, and I'm being helped by, I don't know, this down and out person that's willing to live in the spare bedroom, and I'm like eating top ramen, if I show up at the $1 million elder care facility where my brother's staying, will they let me in? Like, and I'm like, he's my brother. And they're like, yeah, sure he is, stinky britches. And I'm like, come on, I just wanna talk to him and see if he'll give me some of his leftovers. Anyway, that's very silly. Yeah, so you started having this experience earlier on. When I was in high school, I was still drinking the Kool-Aid. It was working for me enough. I got good grades. I was decent in sports. I felt like I had good friends. But boy, you started working, you started feeling this thing in eighth grade. Did it, at what point did it, and then there you are, you had sort of, you were vulnerable, you'd kind of been, the system had been kind of reducing the magnitude of the free spirit of Sam Becker. And then at 18 your dad passes away, and so it must have been harder to deal with because you were not the wild and free and whole Sam Becker. You'd already been kind of, put under unnecessary stress as an 18-year-old.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think by that time I was thoroughly within the clutches of this sort of productivity culture. So I'm only coming to these sort of reflections, um, years afterwards. I think over the last few years, I guess beginning, my later years of college, these were some realizations that I really began to have. But yeah, when I was 17, my dad was diagnosed with a rare melanoma in his eye, and a year later, it metastasized to his liver, and then he died within a month of that metastasization. I really love and I miss him a lot. And we had and I try to maintain, a really beautiful relationship with him. But losing him has certainly shifted the way that I show up in the world. And so yeah, as a young man in society, as a high schooler, uh, a society that is full of toxic masculinity that often robs men of our capacity to feel with our heart. I think I was just fundamentally unequipped to handle his death. And so even though I was going to therapy, I was playing sports, I was surrounded by loving family and friends, I often found myself processing his death with my head instead of my heart. And so, for me, that looked like throwing myself into my classes, diving into extracurriculars. I mean, like the summer before my senior year, right around the time that my dad died, I launched this um, grassroots campaign to ban styrofoam food containers in Medford, which, was an additional 20 hours a week on top of school, college applications, and soccer. And
Wow.
so, this drive to escape my grief through productivity really fit, I think, perfectly within the confines of this productivity culture that we have in this country. And I think it's important to point out that this is a culture steeped in toxic masculinity and white supremacy.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that you said that. It's so synchronistic that just yesterday I watched a podcast by a woman talking about anxiety and depression and then increased workload to distract yourself, which leads to burnout. And then there's a response to the burnout, maybe trying to do a little bit more work. And I had never been, I know about workaholics, I know there's a thing called a workaholic, and I guess maybe that's what it's about partly. But wow, it's so interesting that I just watched this podcast yesterday, and now you're saying that was how you chose to deal with it. And I really love that you're talking about the difference between processing in our heads and processing in our hearts. And learning how to shift into your heart is an incredible skill. And you might take a qigong class, you might take a love and intimacy workshop at the Human Awareness Institute. You might start doing ecstatic dance. There's a lot of ways to cultivate that door to your heart opening and closing easy. And there's people like myself that haven't cried for years, and you do a workshop with the Human Awareness Institute, and you've got 3 people hugging you, and you've been sharing from your heart for 24, 48 hours, and then you start to cry, and you cry, and you cry. And and our society is so subtle. Like, we don't even know why as men we don't cry on a regular basis. And that's why I'm grateful. When my grandfather died, I hadn't cried for years, and I was about to walk into the church where they were having the memorial service. And as I approached that church, it just hit me like a tsunami of emotion. And I was just about to go into the room, and I spun around and I walked out across the parking lot, and tears. It was just a flood of emotions that hadn't occurred in years. And I just loved it. And I just soaked it up because it was a gift from my grandfather. Because the grief that I felt in that moment was exactly equal to the love that I held and hold for that man. And so they were sweet tears, and I gobbled them up. so so that's that's profound. And it's, boy, it's really nice to hear you. How old are you, Sam?
I am 26, going to be 27 in
Wow.
6 days.
What a beautiful what a beautiful age. And that I love that you're talking about, yeah, speaking from the heart versus, speaking from the mind, and knowing how to be able to switch that around. I mean, that's such a great skill. I did some qigong, and I've done these love and intimacy workshops, and I do ecstatic dance where I go deep into trance and I transcend, and I stand there beside my inner child on the dance floor.
Mm,
It is so powerful.
mm,
And if you can't afford therapy, you can afford to go to a 12-step meeting and sit in a circle where people speak their truth. You can afford to be in a men's group and have like bi-monthly meetings where people will hear what you're doing and support you. And maybe you're not supposed to offer advice, but after the meeting, you can get free advice. There are definitely ways to get help, even if you can't afford the $100 an hour therapy. And then the whole point of my book is that ideally you get this help every day of your life. You get up and you love what's in front of you that day, because if you don't, you need to change your life.
mm,
And you see the people you love, and you do the things that you love doing, and you help people, and people help you. And to me, that's what it is to be a mammal. I mean, mammals, Homo sapiens, we help each other out. We're a tribe. We're in the present, and slowing down and being present is one of the first things. And our ancestors didn't have such a challenge because they didn't have smartphones and they didn't have cars, so their feet were on the ground. Their thoughts were in the moment. I mean, we still would reminisce about our loved ones and maybe remember experiences from our past, and we might even think about the future. We might even, as a primitive Homo sapien, we may have thought about, well, fall's coming. We better start getting our wood in, and we better start insulating our hut. But those were all good things. So, yeah. So, how bad did you get with your anxiety and depression, and what did you do about it?
Oof, yeah, that's a great question, and just appreciate you sharing your the loss of your grandfather and just sort of the grief that you let wash over you, and those tears that you experienced. So let's see. I think for me,
I'm gonna this shows you what a horrible interviewer I am. I just want to interrupt you to share this one more thing. I hope this isn't because I'm an egomaniac, but I had that experience where the greatest flood of emotions ever in my world. And then I had a speech to share, a story to share with everybody at that memorial service. And I came and I did my thing, and my brother came and found me. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was just like, and he's not as in touch with his emotions as I am. So he was like kind of blown away to see his brother just soaked. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm having a really good cry. And I went in there and I sat with my family, and my cousin Shelby Jr. was just sobbing. He sobbed through the whole thing because he loved he loved our grandfather so much. But what's beautiful, and I know that you're going to relate to this, is that I have since spoken at about 4 or 5 different memorial services. It's something I do, and it's such a high calling, and it's such a beautiful privilege and opportunity. But I was able, even though I had all that emotion going on, I was able to present this story that I had written, and no problem. And it was just, I just feel so grateful for the connection that I have with spirit that allows me to be in that highly emotional state and be like, all right, I'm going to share this with you guys because this is how much I love my grandpa. So
Beautiful.
yeah, and on my radio show, I cry fairly regular. My friend Roger Annenson got emotional during our interview, and he hit the mute button on his thing, so we couldn't hear his sounds. But yeah, it's okay. It's okay to it's actually ideal to be able to drop into your heart and feel emotions and cry and all that. So hey, you
Yeah.
know what? This is a really good moment. I know I interrupted you. I'm sorry. You were just about to launch off. This is a great moment for the classic intermission. Okay. I got a big question for you. Just a short intermission. I'll be right back. All you listeners, go get your glass of green smoothie, or tell the person in the next room how much you love them, and we'll be right back. Da 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 da. So
Perfect timing.
I realized in the future it'd be slick if I just like hit the music player and just had like some intermission music. But around here we appreciate silence. So Sam, my question to you was, what did it look like when your anxiety and depression got unbearable, became a problem, and what did you do about it?
Yeah, well, so I think I I really, really struggled to sit with the grief that was present after my dad died. I think just in preparation for this interview, I was really just reflecting on, what would have happened if I let myself truly grieve. What would have happened if I let myself miss school, not pursued the styrofoam ban, even took a year off between high school and college, or even just rethought college altogether. I think um, it just reflecting on this, really made me think about, what would have happened if I lived in a society that recognized, and held space for the gravity of death and the pain and the beauty of grief, and love for oneself and others. I think the result of living in this sort of hyper competitive, productive, centric culture for me in high school was that my grief very much festered because I tried to leverage it to satisfy the infinite hunger of the productivity culture. Because, I was very much living in a society that defined me based on the extent to which I could alienate myself from myself and also just the people around me in pursuit of this thing called success. So that obviously did not make me happy. And so as a result, I just struggled with various levels of depression for the next 4 years, really for my entire time in college. And so instead of giving myself the, time necessary to heal, in college, I really just spent, every spare moment doing extracurriculars, really at the cost of my relationship with myself and people I loved. So yeah, it took me really about 4 or 5 years to pick my head up. It was during my last semester of college that this happened. And it was then that I just really needed, I realized I really needed to shift my life.
Yeah, man, I just love the way you say all of that, man. You're so well spoken, and I love I just want you to keep talking.
Oh, Dave, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And what you're saying is quite universal, because there are a lot of kids in our society that are going off to college and they're not sure why, but everyone's doing it. And I think that what you're sharing is priceless, and I think it's going to touch a lot of listeners because it's very universal. And, I've always promoted on my radio show, Farm Talk, trade schools. I've always promoted, like, we all need a roofer. We all need a framer. We all need a mechanic. We all need a chef. Why are we so obsessed with college? Well, because there's people that make a lot of money off of the college industry, just like there's people that make a lot of money off the prison industry. So we are channeled and herded into those places because they make money. Unfortunately, we live in a society that's based on profit, and
Right.
morals are secondary.
Right. Yeah. And of course, when you get to college, then the same sort of format applies. Over the last probably 50 years have just seen STEM education take over, and that has come at the cost of humanities. And so, then we're left with Silicon Valley and high tech kind of filling this this sort of cultural vacuum. And I think the result of that is definitely a loss in depth and community for everyone.
So what did you actually, in a nuts and bolts way, what did you do about your anxiety and depression?
Yeah, so I mean it's kind of a long journey. I'm still kind of working with it. But I'd say um I I think I think it's like it's really centered around therapy. Yeah, I have a tremendous appreciation for therapy and therapists, and definitely recommend therapy to anyone.
Talk
Of course, there are some barriers to it, but go on.
talk therapy, right? Because there's
Right.
there's so many forms of therapy. I mean, there's dance therapy, you can ride on a horse for therapy, but you're talking about a psychologist that will sit and help you process. And if you find a good therapist, a good psychologist, it's somebody that you look up to and they inspire you. And you have a synergy, you have a connection with them, and they help draw out, just their presence helps draw out your higher self.
Totally. 100% agree with that. And I think, so as someone who's done therapy pretty consistently for the last 9 years, I found that it really helps me to understand what I'm feeling. And then I think as a result gives me agency in my life. And so like, there definitely have been some things that I've wanted to change for years, and it's, taken me years to change those things. But I'd say therapy kind of has provided me with the insights, and then have various tools, movement, connection with myself, connection with community, connection with nature. Um, those are kind of the tools in the toolbox that I've really been able to lean on, and so can kind of touch on any of those in greater depth. Yeah, it's certainly been a journey to, I think, get to this place of equilibrium, which I am now. And I, along that path, a path that has not been easy at all. I've been fired from two jobs, for standing up for my beliefs. I really had to go through an unlearning of much of the culture and academics I learned in college. I've had to really investigate, who I am. I've hurt people who I love, and I've also burnt myself out a number of times. And so, that's kind of currently where I'm at. I'm really, I've over the last few years, I've began to find that equilibrium, to find tears, to begin to move through grief, and to find love for myself. So it's certainly not been an easy journey, and it's a journey that, of course, is complicated by the sort of capitalist, exploitative uh, nature of the society in which we live. Which certainly robs a lot of humanity from each of us. So it's I think grief compounds based on so many different external factors, and can't discount the factor of the political reality in which we currently live.
Totally. And well said. And I thank you for saying that. You've done a lot today to point out the machinations of our society. And I think that's a good way to put it, because it is a machine. The dehumanizing factors of our education system and the business world. And if we can avoid that, or do what we can to fix that, then people won't have to have the struggle and the suffering of being run down and being weakened to the point where anxiety and depression show up as symptoms of our failing to feed our souls, but either ourselves or the system and our environment failing to feed us, as well as us not making the decision. So well said, good sir Becker. Again, my guest is Sam Becker, 26 years old, wise young man. How I think it would be fun, right where we are now, to hop into, share an example of a day in your life that feeds your soul, now that you are the conscious architect of your reality.
Mm, yeah. So I'd say, I'd say a lot of those tools, and sort of broad framework of therapy have really allowed me to find, I think, grounding in each day. Sometimes it's a struggle, sometimes the day is more difficult than another day, but I think, using these tools, I've been able to move through depression and anxiety that arises, in a given day, and kind of work through that entrenched depression, that exists within me, and I think a lot of other folks as well. So yeah, I think just a sort of recipe for, daily happiness for me, looks like making sure I am spending a little bit of time every morning meditating. I think about something that I am grateful for, think about an intention I want to set for the day, and then I follow my breath for 15 or so minutes. And then I reflect on that point of gratitude and point of intention. I journal a little bit, and then, go about my day. I am generally trying to have movement in my day. I appreciate moving my body in a lot of different ways. I think ever since I was a kid, it's been a really important uh, kind of regulator for my mind and body. It makes me feel like I am able to kind of just feel into myself a lot more when I have moved my body in a given day, and when I'm moving my body consistently over a given week. And so, that looks like anything from playing pickup basketball at the rec center that's a few blocks from my house, lifting weights at the gym, dancing at various concerts, dancing at various ecstatic dance spaces. It looks like it also, yeah, I think it looks like connecting with community. I just have really, really come to appreciate the role of community, the fact that you can, as a human, participate in something that is so reciprocal, and that is, so much broader than yourself, but is, of course, made up of these small interactions that can really build, it can weave the social fabric into something that feels good and welcoming for everyone. So I have a lot of comrades who I work with to abolish the police and make sure that people who are living on the streets have their basic needs met. I also just really appreciate connecting with nature. It's a little bit hard right now as a Brooklyn resident, but it's an opportunity that I try to take up every week just to make sure I'm like grounding in those places. And yeah, and I have taken an antidepressant. Started that during the last semester of my college and have gone through a few stints of it. Happy to talk more about that too. But yeah, those are some of the practices and experiences that I really try to um, you know dive into on a daily or weekly basis.
Nice.
Yeah,
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 yeah. And I do want to touch on the antidepressant, but I also want to highlight your work with homeless people as a form of service. My sister recommends this book. She works with 5-year-olds, and this book is called Have You Filled Your Bucket Today? And it just shows that as a little kid or whoever, anytime you do something nice for somebody, you're filling their bucket, but it also fills your bucket. So to go into the world and say nice things and do nice things, you're actually giving yourself love and happiness and contentedness. So the fact that you, and on your own, I guess, and a handful of friends, you go out and you check in on the homeless people in your own neighborhood to see how they're doing. Like you're not calling the city or the county like, hey, is it okay? Is there a way? I'm guessing that you're just doing it.
right, right. I mean, fact of the matter is that these are fellow human beings just like us, and they just don't have a house to call their own. And so, I think the reality of living in our society is that so many people are on the edge of precarity, on the edge of living on the streets, but we have this sort of fiction that permeates society, a fiction that makes people believe they're closer to becoming millionaires than they are to becoming homeless, which is totally false. And so, I think it for me, mutual aid where I'm engaging with unhoused neighbors is important because it recognizes that we are all part of the same community fabric and we all have the agency to help each other thrive and to connect with one another. Um, and of course, you unfortunately have police and government that make that connection, make that thriving difficult. So, I think I've really appreciated being able to be part of a community with both unhoused and housed folks who are working to fill a lot of the cracks that have been created, in a lot of cases intentionally by the policies that exist in this country. It's not it's not just a random fact of nature that homelessness exists. It's a product of policy failures that are very much the the product of the greed and the corruption that exists within the sort of political elite of this country. And so yeah, I just feel energized by being able to exist in a community that is standing up to the oppressive presence of police and government and racial capitalism, and just trying to chart a path towards a better world.
So what does it look like? Put us on the ground. You and your comrades are on your way to go check on the homeless camp. I love your philosophy, and I love you have a great perspective on the big picture and the forces at play, and that's all important. And but I like to bring it down to the ground. Like, okay, here what does it look like when you come walking up to the homeless camp?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Keith McHenry, who you had on your show a few shows ago, is certainly a good person to check in or to check out if you want more in-depth kind of analysis of what mutual aid looks like, especially like mutual aid of this sort. But yeah, it's like I myself, a group of other people, we were kind of loosely affiliated under a particular sort of network. We're communicating, making sure we have all of our supplies, and then we're going out. And so supplies wise, like generally, I'll cook food, make sure that, I'm using great ingredients to help people, feel grounded in their own body. Other people are bringing minor medical supplies, clothes, yeah, other kind of materials that can help people feel like their basic needs are being met. And so then, we load those up into wagons and distribute them throughout the city. So yeah, it's just a great way to connect with people. I think you and Keith talked a lot about the power of food being this sort of connecting medium. And I mean, it really, really is. Being able to just meet people where they're at, show up, say, hey, this is what we have to offer you, like, how are you doing? What's been going on? Like, unfortunately, we live in a society where a lot of unhoused folks receive the sort of worst of humanity. They're routinely criminalized by police for existing. They're yelled at by people who have homes for, being close to their property. And yeah, I think it's pretty refreshing for folks who are routinely subjected to that sort of treatment to feel like they're cared about, and vice versa. I think they care a lot about us too. And so I have some really beautiful relationships with people that yeah, people I consider my friends who live on the streets. And again, these are people, these are fellow human beings.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that, and thanks for kind of setting an example of that. I think that's great. It sounds like one of the pieces of the puzzle of mental health is the fact that somebody can look at, like, an average citizen can go by and look at a homeless camp or look at one homeless person standing there and think, losers, get it together, get out of my neighborhood or whatever, that the heart is closed. I think that says a lot about what society has done to shape us, because naturally, as mammals, as hunter-gatherers, if you're a tribe, and that's one of the big problems, is the scale is out of whack. I mean, I've heard people say that groups of 220, like a tribe of 220, is like a real manageable organic unit. And when you're in a city with 200,000 or 500,000 or 1 million, the tribe is pretty gone. And most people don't even know who their neighbors are in the neighborhood and stuff. So yeah, it really struck me that we really have degraded ourselves, that if we don't have any sense of compassion. And and I on my own, I've come to the conclusion that suffering is the seed of compassion. That in order to have compassion, you have to do without, and you have to have suffered on some level. So what qualifies me for having compassion is, the anxiety and the depression and the heartache that I've experienced, among other things. That allows me to feel compassion for other people. And my 12-year-old son named Sam, he's now 18, but when he was 12, he said to me one day, he said, "Dad, you should never judge anyone for what they do, because you never know what secret battles they're fighting on the inside." And I was like, 12-year-old boy?
Wow.
I was like, and he didn't make that up, but he grabbed it and he held on to it. So I was impressed. I got a wiseacre, a good wise son named Sam, just like you.
That's so sweet, Dave. Thanks for sharing that story. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good lesson to keep in the back of your mind at all times.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, and I can be a great judge. I can be super judgmental, but I can also have a little padding, and I can be able to put the clutch in before I'm like, "You loser, how can you be doing that?" So, we're coming to the end of the interview here, but if you want to just say a little something about, I guess, about the antidepressant that you chose to use, and why you got to a point where you were ready to try it, and how effective it was, and where you're at with it now.
Yeah, totally. So I started taking an antidepressant called Lexapro during the last semester of college, so that was spring of 2019, and it felt like after I started taking it and kind of got the dosage right, it felt like there was some sort of armor that was falling away. I really began to experience a broader spectrum of emotion, specifically deep sadness and happiness. And yeah, I think it really just helped me kind of break free from some of those, constraints that I was talking about earlier, productive culture, toxic masculinity. And I think it, ultimately helped me shift the way that I derive meaning in my life. So, I don't think most of that can be attributed to the antidepressant. I think most of that is attributed to the fact that I had really developed a strong framework for myself to move into a happier, more grounded place. The therapy that I had been doing, the various tools that I mentioned, these are sort of the broad frameworks that allowed the antidepressant to be effective. I don't think antidepressants on them by themselves can necessarily could have necessarily gotten me to where I am today. But I do think that in the sort of society in which we live, which is like really, really full of so many of these sort of uh, toxic constructs, that it is in some cases, for an individual like me, I think really helpful to have something that can kind of break through those constructs. So, I think an
You
antidepressant should
don't
be,
psychedelics help people to break through the box and have this like awakening experience? You know,
yeah, no doubt. I mean, I definitely have
adults,
had.
for adults only, of course.
Right, right. I mean, psychedelics are clearly something that are being used in very successful ways to move through grief, depression, anxiety, and yeah, for me, I think I would have seriously benefited from going through some sort of a psychedelic therapy program. It wasn't accessible to me at the time. So I definitely view that sort of therapy as extremely important, and am excited that it is like becoming more and more accessible. but yeah, I think it's likely the case that the antidepressant functioned in a way that would have been similar to, microdosing mushrooms for some specific amount of time under the supervision of a doctor.
Yeah. So share with me the course of the antidepressant. Like you made it all the way till recently without it, and then you got to a point where you're like, man, I need a help to push through, or I'd like to hear like what was the turning point that made you decide to use it, and how long you've been using it, and where you are with it right now.
Yeah, so I started taking it, as I mentioned, my uh, senior year of college in the spring of 2019, and I took it for 2 years. So I got off of it. I got off of it at a time that made a lot of sense for me. I think, 2019 was a very difficult year. Like the sort of like fall of 2019 was very difficult for me. I found the antidepressant to maybe be providing a little bit of resilience, but it's honestly hard to know. I was pretty depressed. I was fired from my first job for telling the truth. My boss asked me to share with her my thoughts about the position I was working, and I took the liberty to tell the truth, and she was really disappointed by what I had to say and fired me. So that was a tough time. And then kind of ups and downs, was ultimately fired from another job. For being in a mutual aid camp after the Almeida fire. So we were providing, food and a bunch of aid to unhoused neighbors, and the cops came and cleared everyone out. They evicted everyone and arrested unhoused and housed people in the process, myself being one of them. So, I felt the antidepressant maybe provide a little bit of resiliency again there, hard to be certain. But yeah, then I spent a few months recovering and decided that it was time for me to make the move to Boulder, Colorado. And so I moved in with, one of my best friends, a brother of mine, who I met in college, and life was feeling really stable. And so that's when I decided to stop taking it. I phased out with the supervision of a psychiatrist, and yeah, it was super nice. I honestly didn't notice any difference. I felt like a lot of the effects that I noticed when I was taking the antidepressant still held. So that spectrum of emotion was still present, and that sort of resilience in the face of difficult moments was still present. And so, yeah, I was off of it for about a year, and then I went back onto it because I was dealing with um, just a number of uh, difficult scenarios in my life. I was really struggling to find meaning in my job. I was struggling to find connection with my housemates. I had recently like spent a lot of time organizing to decriminalize homelessness, and we lost that campaign. So it was really just kind of a difficult time, and I felt that sort of resilience began to crumble. And I felt the sort of depression, some of the depression just kind of becoming overwhelming. And so I decided to start a small dose of Lexapro again. And so I've been taking that for about a year now, maybe a little. Well, what is that? Yeah, maybe not quite a year, and maybe like 7 months, and I'm in the process of phasing out again. So I think,
Yeah.
for me, it has been a tool that I've used cautiously, and a tool that I've used in coordination with, the other tools, in the box that I really think create the structure where an antidepressant can potentially be helpful.
Okay. I'm wondering in these circumstances, I'm not sure exactly how your thought processes work, but have you thought of like ramping up your exercise? like, oh man, I'm having a hard time. I'm going to have to ride my bike every morning, or I'm going to have to go for a run every day. Or maybe you do that and it's not enough and you're still, I mean, do you think that way?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I really tried to exhaust those tools. I was running and lifting weights and was definitely the in the best shape of my life, climbing 14,000 plus feet mountains with barely even a sweat, and was going to my talk therapy, was in a community of loving radicals, and it just there was a sort of feeling that I needed just like a little bit more help. And in some cases I was able to get temporary reprieves through the use of psychedelics, and MDMA, but those while those were really helpful, because I wasn't able to find any sort of a accessible kind of doctor to kind of have those experiences under, I turned again to Lexapro. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I've
Okay.
maintained those practices,
Okay.
those tools that I know are really helpful for me, and I know will, give me a good structure when I go off of it.
So part of my problem with my history of anxiety and depression is I began self-medicating fairly heavy. And thank goodness at about 22 years old, I became allergic to alcohol or something, and I could only drink one beer. The second beer made me groggy. So I was spared alcoholism. But marijuana became my good friend, and I smoked it pretty regular. And anybody, a lot of people that use marijuana know it actually can be a medicine and it can be a spiritual tool. However, if you have an addictive personality like me, it's likely that you will become a daily user, and it could become a crutch, and it could end up being an immobilizing force. It can you can get caught in it. I got caught in it, and it kept me from being able to realize my dreams. And it wasn't until at the age of like 30 or 32 when I quit for good that I was able to realize my dreams. And I bought my first piece of land shortly after, and stepped into this incredibly powerful chapter of my life that I love talking about. But how about for you? So my main point is that I have self-medicated quite a bit. And it's in some ways it maybe is not all that different from doing a psych med or something. And I tend to like it because it's ancient substances. We have cannabinoid receptors in our body because for thousands of years we've been using them. And tobacco, caffeine, marijuana, those they've been around for a long time. And I'm a little skeptical of experimental substances that mess with our ability to uptake serotonin and all that sort of stuff. So did self-medicating, was that ever a thing for you?
No, I think I have a pretty, and in some cases unnecessarily sort of Puritan ethic around substances. I find myself generally being, well, yeah, I find myself being extremely responsible with the amount and the frequency with which I consume them. So there is a part of me that feels I should be less controlling. I think this kind of gets into maybe some sort of other form of analysis, but like, I think there's this part of me that was very much cultivated in the sort of productivity culture mindset, in this sort of in this like in this culture where we always need to kind of be on it, and we need to be able to perform at the drop of a dime. So I think there's part of me that has really inhibited myself from from like going all into some sort of experience, some sort of drug related experience. And so, I think I think obviously, moderation is like a good thing, but I think when we think about like what the golden mean is, it's not always like just having the same amount. It might actually be different depending on the particular circumstance. And so I think, I'm doing a little bit I'm doing a little bit of work right now to just like open myself up to different amounts of different substances, different experiences in order to just kind of um, let myself off the hook a little bit. I think I've been very, very hard on myself in a lot of ways. And so this is something I've been thinking about recently.
Well, good for you, because part of what I was getting to with my self-medication is that I'm pretty positive that I prolonged my anxiety and depression. One of the effects of self-medicating is that instead of making a change in 6 months or 6 days, it might take 6 years to make a change. And that was one of my concerns about psych meds, is that you can take a psych med and you still have the same horrible life you had before. You still hate your life, but you can be happy while you're living a life that you hate, which is not the best answer. But good for you that you didn't lose any years and you did not prolong or feed potentially your anxiety and depression by using our old familiar plant medicines. And but but what's interesting to me at this point is gosh, I lost my thread of thought. Yeah, I appreciate that you're sharing all that. Oh yeah, what I was going to say, thank the goodness it comes back. What I was going to say is that there's many ways, like you're saying, that you want to try and be more open to altered states with plant medicine, but there's so many ways to get high and to shift out of the box of normal awareness and normal thought patterns without using any plants or chemicals. And let's say a Native American sweat lodge is one way to get really high. Stan Groff offers a school of breath work that will get you completely shagadelic. I mean, he used to do LSD therapy and then he switched to breath therapy. And I've done that. And I had a big, long cry as a result of doing some breath work while listening to whale sounds. You can have an altered state by going crazy with cardio and going into a trance. You can do ecstatic dance to get into an altered state. You can go into a sauna. There's just many ways to alter your state and step out of the mental box without smoking or taking anything. And I think that's important to remember.
Definitely. That's 100% important to remember. I definitely am curious to check out that Stan Groff routine and listen to some whale sounds. It sounded like a beautiful experience.
Oh my gosh. I did it a couple times, of course, when I was in Marin County, the grooviest county in America. I did a couple sessions with this guy, and on the second session, I think I really opened up and it really worked. And I hadn't cried for a long time, and I started crying. And when I was in that space, it's about being able to get into your heart and having the ability to, the conscious ability, like, oh, I'm stuck in my head, let me shift into my heart. But then there's times in these workshops, and maybe with a special loved one, where you can get into a place where you're just swimming in a sea of heart consciousness, and that's all there is. And I've gotten there with psychedelic mushrooms before, where all that exists is good and hope and possibility. And I got into that place with this Stan Groff guy, and I started crying. And the only thought that I had was, I care so much about people, and I love the people in my life so much. And what a beautiful place to go to. Similar to this other epiphany I had, I think, while riding my bike one time when I lived in Dunsmuir, was that, well, I was like, wow, it's all about kindness. Like, if you're going to boil it down to one little nugget, kindness is, like, the physical manifestation of love is kindness. And if you can remember that as you go through your day, the world just becomes a better place. Mr. Becker, this is good. I think we made a good podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I really appreciate you. And I mean, appreciate the way you're coming to, the way you're showing up in life, and the anecdotes you've shared with me, and the anecdotes that are, forthcoming in your book. I think you have a really beautiful way of seeing the world. And it's been a pleasure, sharing with you a little bit about my life.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe when my neck's healed up, we could ride a freight train together.
Yes, I would love that. Gosh, when you texted me that, I was like, dang, this guy is doing it. He's done it. And like, that's great energy. That's something I've always wanted to do, and I just have yet to do it. Yeah, I would love that.
So I'm inspired by the three great Jack writers: Jack Kerouac, Jack London, and Jack Steinbeck.
Mm.
And that's sort of true, and it's sort of a joke because Steinbeck's name is John. But
There we go.
but Travels with Charlie's John Steinbeck is definitely one of my superheroes. But Jack Kerouac wrote the book On the Road, and most people don't know that Jack London wrote a book called The Road. So Jack Kerouac was writing on the coattails of Jack London just a bit. And Jack London's book, The Road, is all about him riding the freight trains during the Depression, when it was no joke, and they would like kill you for riding on the freight. When I rode the freight trains, the big scary bull detective guy would come walking down the tracks, and he'd see four of us college kids in shorts kicking a hacky sack, and he would just start laughing, because it was usually like hardened migrant workers and, like, tough people. But anyway, that's a whole nother show. I think you've done an incredible job touching on everything. I think it's a great podcast, and I'm just going to thank you for how you show up in your world, Sam Becker, and the fact that you're giving to the homeless people, so that maybe someday there won't be homeless people, and there won't be a book on how to not have anxiety and depression, because it'll be gone. I'm a pessimistic optimist.
Yes, a better world is possible.
Yeah, we can do it. All right, Sam, I'm gonna hit the record button, and again, I thank you so much. And I'm glad you're here, because maybe I can't find the record button. Oh, there it is. No. Oh, there it is. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Thank you, Dave. Looking forward to being in touch.
Hell yeah. Heck yes. Excuse me.